Hey, welcome everybody to today's Haggerty live stream. Now, during these odd times, we're stepping up our conversations with the most interesting car people. Now, you can watch this as well as a bunch of other fascinating material and be part of our growing community on haggerty.com/media. Please take a look. Now, I'm your host, Larry Webster. I'm the editor of the Haggerty Drivers Club magazine, which naturally is one of the many great benefits of the Haggerty Drivers Club, which is the go-to organization for those who love cars. Today, we have a very special guest. This is the hack mechanic, Rob Siegel. He writes books about working on cars. He's really well known in the BMW community. Oh, by the way, he does a lot of stuff for Haggerty as well. He's in our magazine. He's on our website. He just published a piece about how to resurrect your car after it's been sitting all winter. So, Rob, I want to welcome you. Thanks for coming. I see you were in your garage. Where are you? You're in Massachusetts, correct?
I am in the wilds of West Newton, Massachusetts, a stone's throw from where Route 90 hits Route 95.
Got it. Now, you and I are, we're brothers of a different mother. You know, we drag home sort of cars that most people would pass over, but I like to say I'm not stupid. I'm optimistic, and I'm proven wrong a lot. But I certainly have enjoyed the cars that I've worked on over the years. Now, have you ever bought a car that didn't need a fair amount of work?
Probably not.
Aha.
You know, my whole modus operandi is finding things that are being sold at below market value because they need something.
Sure.
You know, as you know, the cars that you own tend to divide up into daily drivers and project cars. The project cars can be whatever they are, right? They can be dead or dying or resurrectable or anything. The daily drivers at least have to pretend to be capable of being daily drivers. But even then, you know, I try to pay as little as possible. So right now, what's ostensibly a daily driver, even though none of us are really driving a lot, is a 2004 BMW X5. It's an unusual X5 in that it's a so-called triple unicorn. It is a 6-speed sport package car that also has the tow package. So I can strap a trailer to it if needed.
Oh, God, you are brave.
Yeah, so it has 270,000 miles on it. But it was
maybe not just brave.
Yeah, and it was 3,300, which is a lot if it wasn't a triple unicorn. But with that, it was, I think, very well priced, and it needed only a front right lower control arm.
Yeah, that's what they always say.
Yeah. So, well,
just a little bit of buff job, and it'll shine like new.
Yeah.
I mean, you know how it is. But yeah, that's part of it. It's interesting. But you've been at this even longer than I have. I mean, I've seen photos of you rebuilding VW motors on your kitchen sink, right? So when you studied engineering, right? So are you a master's engineer?
I have a bachelor's in math and physics, and then I became a software engineer. And I worked for about 35 years in a rather strange application involving the detection of unexploded shells on old military training ranges, which is a whole other story, as they say.
Yeah, but I mean, you're mechanically inclined. You've been doing this. You like to do the work yourself. You like to figure it out. You like to problem solve.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Right. So but I mean, there are those stories about you rebuilding those flat four motors in your kitchen or not. That really happened, right?
Yeah. Well, I actually started off with bicycles. When I was a kid, I was heavily into bicycles, and I would find them in the trash and yank them out of the trash and strip them for parts. And so the first car that I actually owned myself was a 1970 Triumph GT6 Plus that I owned.
Pretty car.
Yeah, they are. They're adorable. And I owned it as a 6-year-old car. And, as I like to say, it was the car on which I learned that everything bad that you've ever heard about British cars is true. It's all true. And so when it overheated, and I opened up the hood, and through the steam, I saw water streaming out somewhere. I could look at it and say, well, this thing with the pulley on it, must be attached to what must be some sort of a water pump.
Yeah.
I could hitchhike into town and buy a water pump and borrow some tools and replace the water pump. And, because it really wasn't that unlike a bicycle, it was a mechanical system. And actually it all kind of started from there. So the Triumph, without the Triumph, none of this would be here, right? If it hadn't broken as regularly as it did,
Totally.
I wouldn't be the me that I am now.
So shoddy British quality had a very positive effect on your life.
Yeah. Now, of course, now that there's a Lotus in the background, there's a lot of interesting revisionist history that is written about those wonderful old British Leyland cars, because when they're owned and cared for the way that they are now, that they're not used as daily drivers, they're not driven in rain, they're certainly not driven in salt and snow, they behave totally differently than when they were used in that way, 47 years ago.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to let's talk about some of your favorite projects, some of your least favorite. I look back at some cars that I've tinkered with, and there's many that I'm really glad I no longer have to touch again. And then there's some I look back and I go, that was a fun thing to tinker on. I call it adult Lego, by the way. That's the way I look at it. You take it apart, you put it back together. So let's start maybe, what was your, the nightmare car? Was it that Triumph, or let's do something later when you knew a little bit what you were doing?
Well, I can give you two examples. I mean, the GT6 was a nightmare car because in addition to the British stuff and in addition to the Lucas stuff, which is a subset of the British stuff, the GT6 was an oddball car because it had a 2-liter inline 6-cylinder engine, right? It was the de-stroked version of the TR6 engine in a car that the rest of the drivetrain was out of a Spitfire. And so that was a lot of torque. And so everything rearward of the engine would rip out.
Was a fuse, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was a car that actually ripped out universal joints, right? They actually,
God.
It had certain components in the clutch just reduced themselves to powder.
That thing's all ate up with motors, what they call that.
Yeah. So I had metal fatigue issues in that car that I've never experienced in any other car. So yeah, that was a nightmare car.
Right.
The other nightmare car was far more modern. I am a BMW guy, both in terms of the vintage cars and in terms of the daily drivers. And so for a period, I had a 1999 BMW 528i wagon. So that's an E39 car. E39 5 Series generally have a pretty good reputation, but like any relatively modern BMW, they can be pricey to maintain if you have to haul it into the dealership. So almost any late model car has some sort of a crankcase ventilation valve. That's the modern version of a PCV, right? And the crankcase ventilation valve helps to separate the moisture out of the oil. And
right. So as if I could explain real quick, the pistons are going up and down. Below the pistons are, let's call it the crankshaft and then the oil. And as the pistons go down, it pressurizes that area. And you don't want the pistons have to work against that pressure. So you need to bleed it off, right?
Yes.
You can't just bleed it off in the atmosphere like they did 50 years ago because it's hydrocarbon fumes.
Yes.
You got to do something with it. Mostly they burn it. So the BMW has something a little different than a normal valve to do that, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that can happen if you live in a cold climate is that if if you've driven the car just long enough that some amount of moisture has been separated off and then shut it off, and it's like only 5 degrees out, that moisture can freeze the valve. It can send the oil into one of two places. It can send it, it can send it under the valve cover, which is plastic, and shatter the valve cover, or it can send it into the intake manifold, and if you don't switch the motor off quick enough, it can hydrolock the engine. So in my,
how much oil goes in there?
Yeah. Well, if the valve freezes in the wrong way and everything happens incorrectly. So this is what happened on this E39 wagon. You know, it had been a snowy winter. This was like 5 years ago. There was a lot of salt on the road. It was a black car. It looked awful. I drove it to a car wash. It was about 2 minutes from my house. I went through the car wash. It was very cold out. I started the car and I saw clouds of oil smoke behind me, and I shut the motor off before I hydrolocked the engine. So the car, which was then supposed to be a daily driver, was then in the garage for like 2 months while I sorted all of this out. And of course, while you're in there, yada, 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 you know, I did the cooling system and everything else.
Yeah.
And I resurrected that. And after that, it broke a front spring and punctured a front tire. Which I've never heard of happening in like any other car.
Well, that's living in the Northeast for you, right? With all the salt. All right. I mean, I've got a car. Like maybe the next question is that sounds pretty. I don't know. There's cars I remember that I just wish would catch on fire somewhere outside and just burn to the ground. The one I just did like 2 years ago is a 924 turbo. And you remember that was the just there. Hopefully the viewers can see it. Gorgeous car. I mean, I get one of those pings from a buddy of mine. He's like, "This thing's for sale for $5,000. It's in Wisconsin. Has 45,000 miles. One owner. Had the Escort radar detector." I'd been reading stuff about 924s, how cool they are. This was untouched. I don't know what I paid. Like $4,500. Wasn't a lot. It smoked like crazy and didn't run right. I made the guess remotely that the turbo was bad. I said, all right, ship it out here. Shipped it out, and yeah, the turbo's bad, but it's bad too. But the interesting thing was, this was like the first time where I had like bad compression readings, and I was trying to determine the health of the motor. So just going through this whole process was really instructive, because I found one cylinder that was really low in compression. I took the head off, and then you could see, I think we have a picture in here of the head with, you can see the grooves in the cylinders. So you said, that's what's causing that. And then as I took it apart, there it is. You could see those grooves, and that's the number of cylinders. So you're like, okay, how bad is it? It's pretty bad. And I took the motor apart, and I saw, well, the bearings are bad. They got really hot somehow. So I didn't know what happened to this thing, but next thing I know, I'm rebuilding the motor. So it really snowballed into, maybe I should have done my homework a little better, but I was kind of jazzed to have an excuse to rebuild the motor too. I mean, there's always like that yin and yang of the whole thing, So I don't know. I find that part, when it's the unexpected, forces you to learn things that you didn't already know. And if you can be patient about it.
Well, that can be exciting. I mean, a lot of this is the dichotomy between the familiar and the new, right? A car like a 2002, right? I've now had, I think, 38 of these, right? So,
are you kidding? Is that real? 38?
Yeah. So, so I know well, and the TIIs, right? The fuel injected ones, especially. So whenever there is a dead one, or one that hasn't run in a decade or longer, that other folks are afraid of because of the Kugelfischer injection system, right? Something like that has my name all over it. I'm not afraid of it. I'm very familiar with it. There's not a lot of risk associated with that. And so that's a wonderful thing. In contrast, a car like the Lotus, I knew nothing about, other than I kind of always wanted one. And so this one I had bought not unlike you, sight unseen in Chicago in June 2013. I knew that it had been sitting since '79. I knew that it had a seized engine that reportedly had seized from sitting. And that was really all that I knew. I didn't have a clue how rare and exotic a Lotus Ford twin cam engine was, that you don't just find them on Craigslist.
Well, okay, we should back up a little bit though. The Europa, Lotus was Colin Chapman out of England, fabulously good handling cars, cheaply made. A lot of them, like, you assemble yourself so that Colin could fund his racing. And the Europa was the successor. Could you say it was a successor to the Elan?
That's correct.
And so the Elan is one of those cars that really made the Lotus legend. Famously, Peter Egan, the longtime columnist for Cycle World and Road and Track, he had one. And I asked him about it. I said, how great are these cars? He's like, well, I restored one and I was convinced I could re-engineer it to be reliable. And then he goes, and I utterly failed. So the Europa was very much an anticipated car that, maybe because they look a little strange, they never really took off. But you've had a long love affair with these things, right?
Well, I mean, this is the only one that I've ever had. I've had a long infatuation with them because when I was 13, I worked in a stereo store for a guy who had one, and as a kid, that.
Wait, did that guy drive a 280ZX Datsun?
That roof line is only 42 inches off the ground, right? So it's a very low, cool little thing. But I had no idea about these motors, right? The earlier Europas had a Renault engine, right? Yeah. But the later ones, like mine, have a Lotus Ford twin cam engine. So it's a Pinto block with a new head. It's essentially a Pinto block with a fairly exotic Lotus twin cam head. And I didn't have a clue, right? In the BMW 2002 world, if you buy a car that needs a motor, what do you want to pay for a motor? If you want to pay $300, you can find some $300 2002 engine with zero provenance. Right. If you want to pay $800, you can find someone who you can look in the eye, who will say, I yanked this out of a running parts car. I know that it runs without spewing clouds of oil. Yep. If you want to find one that's like recently rebuilt, maybe $2,500 to $3,000, yada, yada, yada. Right. There are no Lotus Ford twin cam engines like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I was watching your project unfold and the nightmare you were having about even like finding right gaskets and the clearance. And it was just like, oh my God. What I didn't understand, and I'm glad you brought it up, was like, that motor is very popular in the vintage racing community. So I was like, there's a lot of people that know this motor. What's different about yours that was creating such a headache?
Well,
Or you just want to do it yourself?
Well, I did want to do it myself, to save money.
Save some money, okay.
I found the expert, right? There's a guy out in Harvard, Mass, with a shop called Williams Racing, and he knows these things inside out. He's a 75-year-old guy who knows everything about them. And I spoke with someone who had rebuilt his motor, and it cost $12,000, and that's great. And I didn't want to pay that. I didn't want to pay half that. So I wound up having him do some of the work and then yanking the motor out and having another machine shop do some of the work. And, then I lost my job and then it all sat for years. And so there were reasons why this took.
Well, okay, let's stop there though, because, I think for you and I, we recognize that, to keep our brains fresh, to keep our creativity going, especially if you're going to write or you're going to do something out, this handwork and problem solving in a very concrete, mechanical way. Because, these corporations we work in, everything's kind of fuzzy. So to have something, works, yes or no. And I know, your books are about that. This section you wrote for our book, Never Stop Driving, really got to the value on mental health and overall health of like just working on cars. So I think there's a part of that for you that you do, right?
Right. So, in as small of a nutshell as I can, um, I can't fix the world. I can't fix healthcare, right? I can't reconcile the Israelis and the Palestinians, but I can replace a windshield washer pump in a car.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a satisfaction in projects such as the Lotus, which went on for 6 years, but there's an incredible amount of satisfaction in diagnosing a problem, even a problem in a daily driver, and repairing it. That there's something that you have control over.
Yeah.
You can make the decisions. The decisions might be to use original parts or aftermarket parts. They're such gloriously inconsequential decisions, with respect to like the problems of the world. But even on a daily driver, right? If the check engine light goes on and you hook up the code reader and it says misfire in cylinder number 4, right? That's almost always a coil pack.
Sure.
So you order a coil pack, you remove the valve cover, you swap out the coil pack, you clear the code, you drive the car, and it's fixed. You fixed it completely. It's cost you $24. You have done it entirely yourself. That's like the best feeling in the entire world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's talk the time that your patience. Like all my project cars, they always have a trip deadline. And it always comes back to bite me in the you know what, because the last two I did was one, my sons and I, we had a 69 Chevelle wagon, and I have a 11-year-old. He wants to make it faster. So I was like, all right, over the winter, we'll put some cylinder heads on it. And then while we're doing that, he decides I think he was 9 at the time. Hey, we should try this on Route 66. Now, I'm not dumb enough to ignore that. When do you get this something like that your kids are initiating? So I was like,
yeah, right,
sure,
gift.
We're gonna ship that thing out to Phoenix and we're gonna drive it home for spring break. Let's get this car done. And we get the car done, and there was a place I shipped it to that was going to install the exhaust, because once we changed the headers and stuff like that, it needed new exhaust. So when we were running it, it was just whole hell of noise. Bah, bah, bah. So he said, run, drove around the block. All right, put it in the truck. Out it goes. They put the exhaust on at the new shop. We fly out to Phoenix, pick it up, and we start it up. And all we hear is tick, 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 tick. And I was like, what is that? And we open the hood and we're about to go on our trip. We're all there, and I'm hearing this motor ticking away. And this was a decision I had to make right there. I was like, well, am I going to delay? We have reservations at the Grand Canyon, or am I just going to hope I don't lose a cylinder? And if I lose a cylinder, do I care? I was just like, all right, screw it. We're going. And just like white knuckled it the whole way home, but it made it. Wow. So, if I'd done it right and had time to test it and drive it and develop it, that might have been better. But I do like that deadline and then that adventure that ensues after that, even if it does screw you.
Yeah. So this car, Louis, this is a 74 2002 TII.
Yep.
That I had bought sight unseen in Louisville.
Oh, right. That was a great story.
Yeah. Right. So this is the subject of the book called Ran When Parked.
Yeah.
And it had been sitting for about a decade. I had someone that I know have a look at it. So I did know some things about it. I knew that the engine wasn't seized. I knew that it needed a center support bearing on the drive shaft. So I rented an SUV and loaded it up with a lot of tools and a lot of parts, drove the SUV down there, and crashed at the house of people who I'd met once for 15 minutes at an event, who turned out to be like the nicest people ever.
That's the car people, man. They're the best.
Totally. I got the car running. I got it sorted just barely well enough to drive back. And it's like you say, it was this whole series of decisions any one of which could have caused me to say, no, I've taken this as far as I can go, and now any sane person would fly home and pay to ship the car home.
No.
I, however, am not that person.
There's an insanity to it. The last winter, 2019, back to that 924, and unexpectedly, I'm going to have to rebuild the motor, which I've never done. And Haggerty does a trip. They drive down to Amelia Island, and I really wanted to take this car on it. So, I mean, I put the motor together. I know we see a picture on the side of the road, so we're getting to the punchline first. I just said, well, I wanted to rely on my wits to get there. So it was literally like from building the motor back up, putting it all together, drove around the block, and then I just got in and drove to Florida. And of course, it died a bunch. It overheated a bunch. There was leaks. There was this. But then that feeling of satisfaction when I got to Florida, I was like, damn, I did it.
Yeah.
And,
so
I like that.
So that is essentially the introduction to the book Ranwood Park. That
a
lot of us, want to do this. We want to pit ourselves against the car, or ourselves and the car against the world. And the interesting thing about the story of Louis is that I thought the whole thing would be, I, the hack mechanic, are going to force you, the car, to bend to my iron will.
Yeah. Okay.
And in fact, that wasn't the story at all. The story was about how wonderful car people are, right?
Wow,
that none of us can do this ourselves, and that we need other people to help us and to bail us out and to advise us, and to post on Facebook, hey Rob, I see you're having a problem. I'm only 40 miles north of you.
Oh, totally.
Those things are what life is made of.
No, that's true. There's another part to it as well. I think like in corporate life, there's very few things. Not many people get to, just in a singular way, do something and challenge themselves, and everything rides on your shoulders. Like the entrepreneurs do. McKeel Haggerty, he does, right? He founded the company, built it up. But for the rest of us, we don't really get that. So this idea where you're going to rely on your wits, here in this photo, we're getting close to a hotel in Georgia, having a great time cruising down this road. It's warm. It's March. I'm not in Michigan. And then the thing starts cutting out, and it just cuts out and dies. And I'm like, uh-oh. And so, I splice some wires, and I kind of get under there, and I figure out, well, that kind of looks like a fuel pump relay. And sure enough, the fuel pump relay is bad. So I put that in there, and it starts up, and away I go. So
that's a great feeling.
Yeah. But then the people thing is funny. I'll tell you one quick story. I was in Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, great roads. It's maybe late in the afternoon. My car, there's a vibration in the right front. So I think, maybe the wheel bearing's loose. Stop off the side of the road. It is very rural. Jack it up. I thought I had the right tools. I'm missing this Allen wrench. Guy stops by, and is very nice. And he calls his son. They bring the tool. I put it all back together. I said, I didn't really find anything. And he knew of a tire store, so I was going to follow him. So I put the car back together, and lo and behold, it's gone. I don't know why. Maybe it was a rock in the tire that I didn't see. Who knows? But I drive next to him, and I say, hey, look, car's fine. Thank you. I want to use the rest of the daylight to drive this road, and away you go. Never got his name. So I write in the magazine about this guy. I said, look, if I'd like to say thank you, such a great guy. And I get a voicemail, and I still have it because it cracks me up. He's like, hey, Larry, this is Randy. You still got that broken down 911? Hey.
That's awesome.
That's the best guy ever. I wanted to hug him. What a sense of humor. So yeah, that way it brings people together. It shows humanity. I'm totally with you. And we all have that Haggerty roadside, right? Worst comes to worst, you call the phone and you get the tow out. But I like trying to fix them.
Right. Well, it's obviously a lot easier now. It's a lot easier these days. you know, a lot of life is in confronting your fears. And when you head off in an old car at 4 o'clock in the morning into darkness, you know, for some insane road trip, you know, it is helpful to remind yourself that, as you just said, you know, the worst thing that happens is that you make a credit card and a cell phone save you, right?
Yeah.
It's not, you know, it's not like you're being dropped behind enemy lines somewhere.
Yeah. No, I tell you, my son's first car was a 98 BMW 328. So, you know, Michigan car has a little bit of rust. And, you know, once they get up to that level, you get weird problems because who knows what's happened to the wiring. And I remember at one point he was kind of like, well, what if, you know, he was just upset about it because it might die and strand him. And I'm like, you're just going back and forth to school. So what? He's like, well, what do I have to leave? What if it doesn't run? I'm like, car's worth $2,000. Just walk away. Don't worry about it. You know, but we'll fix it. But yeah, there is that self-reliance. And the next question I was wondering about, do you must feel a sense of pride of how you've honed your skills over the years. And now you're able to take on a very complicated Lotus motor in your Europa, and you have the wherewithal, the patience, and really the grit to stick to it. So when that thing runs and drives and you're enjoying it, do you feel like you walk a little taller? I mean, how does that feel?
Well, that's an interesting way to phrase the question. I mean, the larger story of the Lotus. I mean, I never actually had driven one of these when I had bought the car. I didn't know that I would like it. I didn't know that I would love it. I certainly had read about them. I'd read about the handling. I had this childhood connection with the car because I had worked for the guy in the stereo store. I had bought the car as a present to myself when my first book got published.
Okay.
I thought I would buy something a little bit out of the ordinary. You know, not another BMW. I joke that I do my best work around $4,000, right? I tend to buy challenged cars or dead cars. You know, I don't.
Yeah, me too.
You know, I'm not one who takes the classic advice that you should buy the best car in the best condition because that's the most likely to appreciate. That's great advice. It's fine, but I don't have that kind of coin. And so I'm a bottom feeder.
Yeah, me too.
And so I went looking for Europa twin cam specials that were, you know, in the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 range, and there aren't many. You can find the older Europas for that, but the twin cam cars, even as project cars, it's hard to find them at that level. So I think I paid $6,000 for the car. I think I paid $1,200 to ship it from Chicago. So not crazy money. But I had, as I said, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah, no, I think that jump into the unknown and it's the you're sort of pushed out of the nest, and how are you going to survive? And not to get too deep, but I that part of, you know, having to figure it out is it's one of my favorite things, especially if I've never done it before and it's an opportunity to like, oh, never did that. Okay.
Well, I mean,
I curse it in the middle, by the way. Like, how could I be so stupid? This sucks. I hate this thing.
Well, the larger story of the car is that about a year and a half ago, I sort of reached the point where it had been sitting here in the garage for 5.5 years. I'm able to squeeze 4 cars in here. I currently own 12 cars. I rent storage about 50 miles from here for the 4 other classic cars. So there's no pretending that a car that's sitting for 5.5 years isn't actually costing you money because you're having to rent garage space for the other cars. And so I reached the point where I realized that I either had to sell the thing at a loss, or I either needed to put shoulder to the grindstone and all that, and to get the thing running, which in fact was likely to cost me even more money. But one of those two things needed to happen. And it was, in fact, incredibly satisfying to, over a period of months, finally get the motor rebuilt, finally get it, finally get it installed, then to drive the car, and then to find out that I love this.
You're lucky.
It's completely un-BMW like. It's buzzy. It's weird. I can't get enough of this particular car.
That's great. I mean, that 920.
I had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah, the 924 turbo that I rebuilt, I knew like 50 miles in, I was like, this is not a keeper. I hate this thing. Sold it immediately. It just wasn't my kind of car. It's funny. My neighbors, I'll bring home a car, and I'm a bottom feeder too, because I like to drive I just like to drive cars really hard. I like to take them on long road trips. I don't want to worry about them. So I always joke the cars come to me to die, because I'm not going to wax it. I'm just going to use it. I'm going to drive it. I'm going to have fun with it. It has to feel mechanically correct. So I end up replacing a lot of bushings and steering linkages, so it's tight. But they always joke, like, I thought that thing didn't need anything, and it's all apart. And I always find some excuse to just dismantle it. And I think that's my way of really getting to know the machine. And then once I really know it intimately, then when I go drive it and I know what's going on and I can detect things, there's some comfort in that I haven't quite worked out. But I need to know these things on a very intimate level, and then I feel connected to it. Odd, I know, but I do.
Well, there's no right answer to any of this. For some folks, a car has to be almost at the Concours level, right,
Yeah.
in order for them to be satisfied with the car. And that's fine. I tell my wife, if you ever see me in the garage with a Q-tip, you should call
Shoot me.
someone, right? Because I will have crossed some line that for me just isn't right.
Yeah.
Like you, I like cars that are highly functional.
Yeah.
One of the things that I often say is that a car has to be for something.
Yeah. It has to have a mission. It fulfills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what that is, there also isn't any right answer to.
No.
If a car is for taking it to Cars and Coffee, that's fine. As long as that works for both you and the car. If you think that it's for high performance driving events, and the entire front end of the car is wonky because you haven't sorted out the ball joints and the tie rods, then that's a problem, right?
Yep.
If you think it's for long haul road trips and you haven't checked out the cooling system and on and on and on and on, then that could be a problem.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is about aligning this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think if you're gonna, we're putting together some stuff about, the big things you need to know with some of these old cars, and it is kind of daunting if you're not, you don't know anything. You really kind of feel a little bit lost. And we're trying to, I know you've been working on some of this stuff too, to demystify it, some basic guidelines to help people be a part of it. But back to your people thing, this last fall, I think I don't think one of the best financial deals, but one of the best car deals I've ever made. Is a friend of mine. He's been fixing Porsches for 40 years, used to have his own Porsche shop, was trained at the factory. He's 60 something. He's got a 914 with a big motor he's had for 10 years. He wants to get a Cayman. That car, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. This car needed a lot of work. It's deferred maintenance and needed some sorting. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'll buy it. But if I need help, will you come over and help me? And he said, oh, sure. So the whole winter I'd call him up, and I got this tutor who knew freaking everything. And I would write all these questions down, and then I'd call him and I'd say, all right, I need you to come over and help me here. best thing I ever did. I learned more this past winter and just absolutely loved it. So, if you can, and I'm trying to tell folks, if you can work that sort of mentor relationship in there, I think there's a lot to be gained in informal situations like this. And I always tell them, like, I would offer to pay somebody to come over regularly to help tutor you, because I think you can really accelerate your learning. Because you never went to any school for any of this, so you're all self-taught, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's a lot easier now. I mean, you can hop on YouTube, you can find an enthusiast forum, you're able to post the question on Facebook. It's rare if you're the first person who has encountered a particular problem.
Sure.
Occasionally it happens on one of the TIIs, not on mine, but on one of on a car that a friend of mine owns. He was heading to an event. There is a vintage BMW event that's called the Vintage.
Yeah.
That is down in Asheville every year.
Yeah.
And this guy was heading to that event with his wife in a TII, and in Virginia, it just started to run horribly. It had never actually died, but something was clearly wrong. So he stopped. He posted on Facebook. I was on the way down. I stopped. I couldn't figure it out. He and his wife had to bail out. They had to have the car hauled home. I arrived at this event, and everyone was asking me, so what happened with Brian's car? And, I was like, I couldn't fix it. And it bugged me. So I made the guy this insane offer that no rational person would make. I said, if you tow me the car, if
you haul me the car, I'll fix it.
If you haul me the car, I'll fix it for the cost of parts. And it took me 3 weeks because it turned out that the problem was that a spring inside one of the mechanical fuel injectors actually had broken. That because of rust, because of ethanol in fuel, I wound up removing all of the injectors and taking all of them apart, and you could see that all of them had been contaminated with rust. And in one of them, the spring actually had snapped in two, and so the injector was never actually opening and closing. It was just sort of flapping
around.
And
wow.
And to this day, even pros I know, no one else has ever seen that problem. And so
and you figured it out.
So that one was particularly challenging.
No, that's a great one. Well, we have about 15 minutes left. Let's go to some questions. A guy named Mike says that you once wrote an interesting piece about mechanical fuel pumps and where to put the fuel filter. And you had a Bavaria with a mechanical fuel pump. Let me just say for folks, a mechanical fuel pump is typically driven off the engine, and it uses maybe the cam or something to drive a lever and like a plunger that cycles a pump. And most cars have an electric fuel pump that goes on when you turn the key. But at some point in any fuel system, you want to include a filter to get all the stuff in the rust and whatever junk is else in the fuel or in the tank. And so I guess the question is, I would think you'd want to put that filter, where would you put it on a mechanical fuel pump? There's no other way to do it but between the tank and the pump, right?
Right. So this just came up, and I just wrote about it, and it was on this car. So this is a 48,000 mile 2002 that I had bought in September that had sat for about a decade. And when I tried to get it started after cleaning out the fuel tank, it wouldn't prime, by which I mean the mechanical fuel pump wasn't able to draw enough fuel to fill up the gas lines and to fill up the float bowl. I actually had to take an electric fuel pump and splice it in line in order to draw the fuel in and fill up the float bowl and start the car. Then once the car was running, it worked fine. But there was this issue that it wouldn't prime. And I had forgotten all about the problem. The car was in the garage all winter. And then just last week, this happened again, right? I wanted to start the car after it had been sitting all winter, and it would not prime. No matter how long I cranked it, the mechanical fuel pump wouldn't suck fuel out of the tank and into
Well, unless the engine RPM was higher than starting.
Well, right. It turns into what you would think of as a bootstrapping problem, right? That if the engine is running, then the engine RPM is higher, and so the fuel pump is running faster, and so the pressure is higher. But if the engine is only cranking as opposed to running,
right?
Yada, yada. So as part of troubleshooting this, I removed the fuel pump and just tried pumping it like manually, and found that it did in fact move fuel. I then returned the fuel pump to the car and fed it fuel from a container and dumped that fuel into a bottle, and I found that it did in fact move fuel. So what was the difference? The difference turned out to be that the fuel filter was in front of the fuel pump. It was on the inlet side of the fuel pump. And I thought, well, isn't that always where it is in a 2002? And I looked and I learned something that I never knew, which was that in fact, these cars never had external fuel filters from the factory. There was only a fuel screen in the trunk and then another fuel screen inside the fuel pump. Reading further, I learned that if you have a mechanical fuel pump, that in fact is common, that typically there is only a fuel screen in the tank. And if there is a fuel filter, it's on the outlet side of the pump, because if you have a fuel filter with any real volume to it, that volume creates a pocket of air that can create a priming problem.
Yeah, I get it.
Right.
Yeah. On starting RPM, which is 750, 900, it's not enough to draw past that air bubble.
Right. So obviously this varies car to car, but I found that on the 2002s, that the idea that these always had a fuel filter in front of the fuel pump is not correct. They never had that from the factory. So I removed that, and the car then started to prime itself absolutely fine. So wow. I'm not saying that it should never have a fuel filter there, but I'm saying that in this case, it was a problem, and having a large fuel filter was creating a pocket of air that it was unable to prime out.
I got it. Okay. What's next on your list? What are your eyes on? What's your next project?
Well, I'm still, a 74 Lotus Europa twin cam special has a punch list that's infinitely long. This is now at the point where I can just hop into it and drive it and enjoy it, and that is a glorious thing. But it doesn't mean that there still isn't stuff to do. The green 2002 TII over here. Actually, I found out last fall that it has a cracked head. This car had been down at the BMW Car Club Foundation Museum for a year as part of their 2002 related exhibit. When I went down there to pick up the car, I found that it was leaking a lot of oil, and it turned out to have a crack in the head, not through the combustion chambers, but up near the top.
Oh.
So it is leaking oil close to the valve cover onto the exhaust manifold.
Oh, bad.
In order to drive it home, I repaired it with JB Weld. Yes, you actually can use JB Weld to fix the crack.
Oh, that's awesome.
Again, not in the combustion chamber, but so the head on this has to come off.
Got it.
At some point, I do need to do that.
Yeah. Kurt asks, I wouldn't have no idea how to answer this question. Maybe you do. He's got a TII 72. Cool, Kurt. That's a cool car. Haven't driven one of those in a while. And he needs a respray. According to what's going to be better for the value? I guess the question is, would a single stage paint job be important to maintain the value of the car, or there's multiple stage and more clear of modern paints? Where do you sit on that?
Right. So the distinction for anyone who's watching who doesn't know, so there are what are called single stage paints and two stage paints, and the two stage paints have a base coat and a clear coat on top of that. And although I'm not a paint and a body guy, I have had cars repainted both ways. In high-end paint jobs, the single stage paint, which is what was originally on most vintage cars, tend to give you a depth of finish. It's that, obviously, if it's well shot and well sanded and all that, but it's the single stage paint that tends to give you the depth of finish that makes it look like you could fall into the finish. In contrast, the two-stage paint jobs with the base coat and a clear coat, the clear coat contains the chemicals that help to keep the UV from destroying the paint.
Sure.
It's not the same as just spraying a coat of clear that's likely to flake off on top of any paint job, right? It's a system, right? It's a two-stage system.
Right.
I have a BMW 3.0 CSI that was resprayed in a base coat, clear coat.
Two-stage, yeah.
32 years ago, that anyone who looks at the car, especially in the sun, their mouth just hangs open because of the shine. So it's an argument about depth of finish of a single stage paint job versus the shine of a two-stage paint job. In terms of what will affect the value of the car, I think that other factors, the condition of the car, the quality of the paint job, whether all the chrome is replaced, any number of other things are more likely to affect the value of the car than whether the paint is a single stage or a two-stage.
Yeah. So we got another question. What I love when we do these things, right? We talk about the love of cars, the joy of working your hands, and you really realize some of the very specific questions that we get, like the one I'm going to read you, like how much misinformation is out there and how hard it is to find real information. We hope all the listeners to keep coming to Hagerty and tell us what you need to know, because we'll find out. But the Greg Lacrosse asked, should I store my 2004 BMW 330 Ci in a heated space in the winter? Will it make a big difference? Now, we don't know what, let's assume he's in your area, the Northeast, where the winters are kind of hard, and that's why he's asking this. My vote would be yes. I mean, at the very least, you don't risk freezing your battery, which can crack it. But I would prefer a heated space. What's your take?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is always yes, if you have a heated space.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It depends on the value of the car, how much you love the car, and if you.
Well, what's going to happen? Let's play out. Let's say you remove the battery, because the electrolyte, when it gets really, the liquid in a battery can freeze and expand and crack the battery. But let's say you remove the battery. Let's play it out for a second. You leave your 330 in a garage and it gets down to like 5 and 10 degrees for a couple of weeks. What might happen? Is it just the action of shrinking all that rubber and all those seals that then all have to expand together in a higher temperature that could cause some trouble? Is it more than that? Where do you sit? Cracking?
I personally don't think that it's an act of violence against a car if you leave a modern car out in the weather. In contrast, if it's an older car without undercoating and a galvanized body, it is an act of violence against the car to leave it outside in the elements. That's just the way that it is. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have one of these or an old Volkswagen,
Yeah. But he's talking about not even leaving it out.
Yeah. I wouldn't feel horrible leaving, a mid 2000s BMW outside over the winter, as long as it isn't a convertible. I don't think that I don't personally think that is an irresponsible thing to do with the car, or that it will grossly adversely affect its value. But if you love the car and if you have access to a heated space, absolutely. Bring
Yeah, I think, Greg, it's hard to summarize, but we would say if you got it, use it. If it's at least inside, that's way better than leaving it outside. So, but then if it's going to be really cold, remove your battery. We just got in a debate with one of the guys at work about these trickle chargers. And he's like, you don't need them. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, if you just disconnect the negative terminal, like the thing that kills batteries are heat and vibration. And obviously deep, deep cold. But if you avoid those, the battery should stay charged for a long time without having to have a trickle charger on it. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Right. So I obviously have electricity here in the garage.
Yeah.
But in the spaces that I rent, I do not. So I'm not able to hook up a trickle charger.
Right.
And I do exactly what you just said. I simply unhook the battery. I simply unhook the negative connection of the battery.
Yeah.
And almost always 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, if I head back and simply reconnect it, it's fine. It just fires right up.
As long as it's not too cold. Well, thank you. That was really a great conversation. Thanks for your time, everybody. Rob's got a bunch of books. My favorite is Memoirs of a Hack Mechanic. I think you really got a good sense of why we love this and why it's valuable and all the problems. You have some talk in there about it's a version of yoga for some of us. And I was like, that was like some of the best patches I've read. So I encourage everybody to give it a read. And thanks for all the stuff you do for Hagerty and on our website and the Hagerty Drivers Club. And everybody, please go to hagerty.com/media and have a great weekend. Thank you, Rob. See ya.
Thank you so much, Larry. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, bye-bye.